You have somehow ended up listening to The Stuff That's Real That You Didn't Know Was Real, but also is cool podcast. Or Sturty Dickwur Bayik. Or, never mind.
That's right, everyone. You are listening to the Stuff That's Real podcast with your gracious and loving co-hosts, Nicholas Ryan Thacker, that's me, and J. Kevin Dr. Master Tumlinson Esquire the Third. Am I close?
You're very close.
Very close.
You're missing a few of the initials and acronyms and
missing some superlatives in there.
Right. I actually do know PhD. Have I ever told you about this?
Of course you've told me about that, yeah. Every time I try to intro you on one of our mini podcasts we've done together, I think you're
we did. That sounds
Esquire,
like me.
PhD.
That does sound like me.
Oh, man. Well, what better co-host could you possibly have, listener, than someone with many superlatives in their names, such as us? We are going to jump right in today. We've got some I'm assuming pretty exciting. Listen, you guys are listening to this show, tuning in every week. I love you for that. Here's a little behind the scenes, how the sausage is made for you. Neither one of us know the story that the other guy is going to say before we talk about it, which is really cool. It also opens us up to many possibilities of picking the same story every week. So consider it serendipitous. Yeah, consider it serendipitous that has not happened in a whopping 6 or 7 episodes now that we're into it. But I'd say it's bound to happen at some point.
One of these days, I'm going to show up without a story and let you go first. And I'm just going to
cut my story in half.
Exactly the story that I picked. That's so weird.
I'm going to just cut my story in half. I'll say the first story is about Fermi, the scientist, and the second story is about things called paradoxes.
I could talk about paradoxes.
Exactly. Paradises?
You're right.
You could. Are you going to talk about that today, or you got something else for us?
Got something else, which could fall, I guess, in some ways, could fall under the heading of paradox, because it involves scientists who are behaving like complete Neanderthals, to pull in terminology currently in use by the president of these United States. So this is the story of the Demon Core, which also just happens to be the name of my current work in progress in the Dan Kotler series. So it is in fact based in part on this. So you ready? You ready for the story?
I've never been more ready in my life. Tell me a story.
So the Demon Core is actually, it's a 14-pound, 3.5-inch sphere of plutonium and silver and nickel. It is the third core for a third atomic bomb that would have been dropped on Japan, but they did not, because as it turns out, dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan turned out to be plenty. So they did not use this core. But what ended up happening with it was that it was sent to Los Alamos, the secret base at the time that was mostly, at this point in history, Los Alamos was where a whole bunch of physicists and scientists and military personnel were kind of working on next generation technology for the military. There's a lot of controversy that surrounds this because there were a lot of ex-Nazi scientists at the
Operation Paperclip.
Paperclip was one operation, and Paperclip was sort of the operation that brought these scientists to Los Alamos, and this core, along with its brethren, Fat Man and Little Boy, which were the bombs that were dropped on Japan. So these were all they were all the result of the Manhattan Project, where they were trying to make fissionable cores that would become atomic bombs. So the interesting thing about the Demon Core is how it got its name, and this is in part why I included it in the current book. But back in like 1945, starting in 1945, there were these 2 scientists who were working with the Demon Core, and what they would do essentially is the whole way to study how this thing works and what what could be done with it was to essentially bring it as close to a chain reaction as possible. Okay, so what they wanted to do is get very close to a neutron burst, which is the most radioactive thing about one of these bombs. You know, when you see the footage of an atomic bomb go off in the whole mushroom cloud and everything, that's not really the dangerous part. The part happened well before that, when there was a neutron reaction and this literal blue pulse of light erupts, and your life is over before your body even realizes it's dead. So where the core got its name was not from where you might think, because after seeing a couple of these guys blow up most of Japan, or a big chunk of Japan, and irradiate it for all time, this core was brought back to the United States and taken to Los Alamos to be experimented on, and two scientists in particular worked with it. Let me grab their names real quick. So the first was Harry Daghlian, and the second was Louis Slotin. And both of them became famous in the worst possible way. So basically, Harry was working with the core and was experimenting on it. And what he did was he built a sort of, he used these beryllium bricks to build a kind of almost like a fire pit around the core. Okay. Now the core, as I said, it was a sphere. It's like a lawn bowling ball. Bowling ball,
a bocce ball, something like
that.
Like
a bocce ball, you know. It was 3.5 inches in diameter, and it weighs about 14 pounds. It's actually not radioactive to the touch. You could pick it up, hold it in your hand. What you would want to do afterwards is thoroughly wash your hands, because plutonium outside the body, not so bad. Plutonium inside the body, very, very bad. So, but the way it was always described was it was kind of warm to the touch, you know? So clearly these guys are handling this thing. Mm-hmm. No radiation suits, nothing like that. So Harry was experimenting with a sort of, he had built basically a chamber of beryllium bricks. And the way he controlled the experiment was there was one brick missing. So there was a gap. As long as there was a gap, you couldn't have the critical mass buildup. Okay, so what's happening is beryllium is reflecting the radiation back onto the core, and it's sort of a self-feeding loop. And eventually, if it's all enclosed, it'll reach critical mass, and that is the neutron pulse. And that is facilitated by an implosion in the bomb, an implosion design device to basically force all that energy back into the core and create that chain reaction. But for experiments, they were doing it by bouncing it around with beryllium. Well, what ended up happening with Harry was he dropped one of the bricks, and it accidentally fell perfectly to close the gap. And all it took was that, because the reaction was constantly building up to the point where it would release, as soon as that brick closed the gap, it released. And so you had a bright blue flash, and not only was Harry impacted by this, but the security guard in the next room was hit by this. And both of them ended up having to be rushed to the emergency room, and both died horrible, horrible deaths. Basically, as soon as Harry saw that brick fall, he reached out. I mean, the instant it fell, he reached out and grabbed it. That hand, within the hour, all of the skin was burned off of it, falling off his hand. He suffered severe burns all over his body, and I believe that the security guard may have only died from the exposure. I think he had leukemia, but I don't recall exactly. But I think that's right. I think he was close enough that he got a lethal dose of radiation, but basically died from like leukemia. Yeah, that's fun times, because you're a security guard at a you're military, but all you're supposed to be doing is reading your Mad magazine and kicking your feet up on the desk and making sure no yahoos come in to interrupt the scientists who are doing what is supposed to be the real work, right?
Right.
So fast forward 9 months. This is where the story to me takes the turn for the wonderfully stupid. So in 9 months, we're back with the core. This time, it's with Dr. Louis Slotin, who has devised the same sort of shell that would have been used in the bomb itself. So it's two halves. Think of two coconut shells. Okay.
Okay.
One on top of the other, clamped together, and inside of that would be the core. Now, you would use all kinds of things to make sure that those two halves don't close.
Right.
So one of the options you should, right?
You'd try.
Let me put it this way.
Stick a finger in there to keep them apart, right? Like,
yeah, you've heard of Richard Feynman, right? Dr. Feynman.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Okay, notorious prankster. He referred to all experiments with this core before it was known as the demon core as tickling the dragon's tail. He was pretty certain people were going to die before Harry even died. Okay. So that's how dangerous this thing was. It was known to be this dangerous. So Slotin is experimenting with it. Slotin's a cowboy. Okay. He wears blue jeans, t-shirts. You know, he's cocksure.
Oh, not just by attitude alone. I mean, he's a cowboy.
He is living that. I don't know his origin. Haven't looked that closely into him, but that's his style, right? Jeans, t-shirt, and an attitude. And what he decides to do is take these two spheres, and he likes to run his experiments by hand and screwdriver. So basically, what he's got is the top shell. The sphere is in the bottom shell. The top shell he lowers by hand, and then uses a small flat-headed screwdriver to create a tiny gap, so that there can never be a full chain reaction. And he does this experiment hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. Okay.
Bound to happen.
And he's got a group of scientists with him in the room, and there's about 15 of them. And he's doing the experiment just like he always has. And a casual slip of the screwdriver closes that gap. Boom. And there's an instant blue flash, and he immediately reaches out and removes the beryllium cup. And of course, he is already dead. I mean, you know, he's breathing, but he's dead. I mean,
he's walking dead. Yeah,
he's walking dead. The guy who was just casually looking over his shoulder went blind in the eye that was exposed. He had a lower dose of radiation because it was blocked by Slotin's body, so he survives. Every single scientist except Slotin survived. Though many of them died years later from various health conditions that we now know were traced back to that exposure. One of them died in the Korean War a year or so later, I believe. I don't know timing on that. I may be wrong on the timing, but he died in the Korean War. So the moral of the story was not only was Feynman right about tickling the dragon's tail on this, but you know, scientists can also be cocky and not quite playing their A game. But the end result was the demon core was named the demon core, first of all, and was deemed too dangerous to keep around, and so they took it away, carted it away to be melted down and re-added to the nation's plutonium reserves. So
it no longer exists. Supposedly. They turned it into Jumanji. So somewhere there's this heartbeat sound that kids are going to dig up, and
that is the more or less premise of my book. I'll just spoil that much because it is revealed in the preface of the book that the demon core did actually survive. So
right.
And then everything from there you'll have to read to find out. But that's it. That is a pretty typical example, by the way, of the kind of thing that I stumble across and decide to make into a novel. Like I was just casually cruising YouTube one day and saw a video entitled something along the lines of whatever happened to the demon core. And I was intrigued by the very notion of that and started I watched that video and did a little bit of research and did quite a bit of research actually. And now, I know that happened. That one's stunning to me though. Like that one is the death of several people because somebody was a moron.
Yes.
Somebody should not have been a moron.
Oh, that's good stuff. I was just trying to find the book. So it reminded me, there's a book by my favorite author. I'm going to talk about James Rollins in a minute in my story. But he also wrote a book called The Demon Crown. And I know I've read it before, but like most things I've done in the past, I've completely forgotten. It's actually not about that, but I thought it just rang a bell when you said that, Demon Core. And I thought, well, man, maybe he wrote it about that, but he did not.
You know what I didn't do as part of my research was I never have looked to see if anyone else has written a book on the subject or even called The Demon Core. But I guess I probably should have done that.
I guess you should have done that.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So, man, that in the realm of scary and creepy, maybe that's the theme of the day. I guess your theme was more kind of here's some stupid facts of history, or here's some stupidity throughout history.
Here's some colossal stupidity from history. Stupidity. Yeah.
I'm trying to find I can't find the book that I just finished reading it, and it's like it's missing on his author page. But I'm going through James Rowland's author page. This book I just read on my last trip to the mainland to get my dogs. It's by my favorite the guy that got me into writing fiction, I should say, James Rowland. He writes action adventure stuff just like we do. But he wrote a book, and dang it, I'm gonna find it and I'll link to it. I just can't remember the name of it. It wasn't the seventh play. One, it was too old. No, I think it's the third newest one that he's got, and for some reason it's not showing up right here.
Crucible?
It's not Crucible.
Okay.
I don't think it's Crucible. No,
right.
It's not Crucible. That's the one. That's what I'm reading right now. It must be number 13, which would be The Demon Crown.
Okay.
Is that it? Yeah.
That is.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's the one. Okay. So, this is not about the Demon Core, but this is about the subject of my nightmares, the murder hornet. Actually, it's not the subject of my nightmares. I have no problem with wasps, with bees. I do know people who are terrified of them, and for good reason. They're pretty scary things. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the murder hornet because it is both real and large, and does in fact kill large mammals. Has been known to do that, and also, like most things that have been spun through the American media system, it is completely blown out of proportion. So this is a stuff that's cool and that is also real episode about murder hornets. These guys are actually the Japanese giant hornet is what they're kind of known. That's what they were before our media system decided to kick it into high gear and scare the crap out of us by calling them murder hornets. Because it turns out they only kill, I think they kill like between 30 and 40 people a year in Japan. But the vast majority of those deaths are related to them being allergic to, they would have died from a bee sting, that kind of stuff. It's not because they have this high level of anaphylactic, there's not a bunch of venom and poison and all that stuff in these things. They're just larger versions of regular wasps, basically, but they are pretty large.
Yeah.
They're the Vespa mandarinia is pretty common. It's in Asia, so it's not just Japan, but I have heard them called the giant hornet or sparrow wasp. Some people call them that.
Yeah.
But I've most recently heard them called, the Japanese giant hornet.
The Asian giant hornet.
Asian giant hornet is another word from same thing. So they're pretty large.
They do call it Japanese giant hornet.
Yeah, that's why I've seen that one too, but I think it's all the same thing. Pretty distinctive looking though. They're orange and black, so they have this kind of yellow jacket sort of look, but a big orange head.
Yeah.
And here's what I think is really, I won't say neat about them. It is neat. I'm not an entomologist, but I think this is what the entomologists really like about these guys. So it seems like everyone in the wasp family is smart. Not individually, but these guys are hive mind sort of creatures, but also can do some damage individually. So they're pretty social, right? They'll defend their nest. If you go near them and start aggravating them and stuff, they're going to defend themselves. But like other wasps, and this is why I hate the idea that we turned them into this murder hornet thing. They're not going to do anything to you if you just walk up to one and say hello, offer it a glass of water. I was reading James Rowland's. It was The Demon Crown, and he's done something really cool with these. It's not the exact hornet, I don't think. Yeah. I know it's not, because he actually, and spoiler alert, is he has his characters find these things in a cave, sort of Jurassic Park style, like in embedded in some sap or something. And they basically reincarnate them, and they create this super strain of wasps. So if you're afraid of wasps, this is probably not the book to read, but there's just a lot of similarities between the guys that Jim was talking about in his book and these giant murder hornet things. Arguably, though, pretty terrifying. They're pretty big, about the size of a human fist. I think can be that long, that big.
Yeah,
maybe not quite that big, but yeah, I mean they're larger than any hornet I've ever seen for sure. And of course, why we know about them and why we're talking about them is they found a nest somewhere, I think Vancouver or Washington, in late 2019. And then, of course, 2020 was filled with fears of pandemic and murder hornets stealing our babies.
So much.
If anyone was alive in 2020, you remember that.
There was so much of that, by the way, that virtually everyone ignored the fact that there was a release of actual verified footage of UFOs from the U.S. government. That's how. That's right. That was all that. So yes.
So almost to the point of where. So they say that a couple queens from these colonies snuck into some freight or something and were shipped over, and then they, being queens of a hive mind, they started another hive, and that's how we got these murder hornets into the States. But it all sounds like a conspiracy theory to me, where the government maybe said, hey, we're going to release this stuff that we've been kind of coerced into releasing about the UFOs, so we need some kind of distraction. How about this murder hornet? I think that's kind of most likely what happened, but that gets a little into the writing the fiction that you and I tend to do.
These things are friggin' scary, though, because they're huge and just intimidating, right? But
intimidating, that's a good word for them, yeah.
They don't even, it's not just that they can sting you. They actually have the ability to spray venom into your eyes.
Oh, wonderful. That's a really pleasant addition to this murder hornet.
Isn't that fun?
That is fun.
That's my proof that nature earnestly and genuinely is just out to kill us all, is really all that's about. Like, my thing about oceans. Like,
I do know anything about oceans.
I don't want to go in the ocean, because everything in the ocean is trying to kill me. But
yes, it may be small.
The same is probably true of everything else.
That's fair. I think so too. I mean, if you've seen the Crappening, that old M. Night Shyamalan movie, the trees themselves are trying to kill us all. It's just the circle of life, Kevin.
I never saw that movie, but I kind of got the gist. I don't know why I didn't see it. Yeah,
the whole thing. They set it up as like, whoa, what if it's the trees from like minute one, and then you get to the end, and he goes, yeah, it's basically the trees.
Trees.
Damn it, there's nothing. There's no twist. There's no. I mean,
so is it like they're releasing pollen that's meant to?
It's something like that's the thing. There's no real scientific. From what I remember, there's no like scientific. That's what makes movies like that good, or books like that. When I try to write something, I'm like, well, let's give it some scientific bent, even though it's fiction. Like let's make up some science that explains it at least. M. Night Shyamalan, I mean, he's a horror director and writer, and so he's going more toward let's just give you the heebie-jeebies rather than explain it away and make it sound real. Anyway, this isn't about Mr. Shyamalan. He's a good guy making good movies. This is about the terrifying, spray you in the eyeball murder hornet that wants to kill you. But the truth of the matter is, these aren't killing a lot of people. The article that I'm going to link to is theconversation.com, and it's pretty good. It's basically five facts about the murder hornet. And one of them in here, it says, look, it's killed fewer than 13 people in 2017 and 2018 in Japan specifically, so possibly more. But that's less than 0.00001% of the national population. And so this is one of those things where, if you're allergic to bee and wasp stings, don't get close to the murder hornet. It could kill you.
I think as a general rule, just don't get close to the murder hornet.
That's just it. I mean, unless you're an entomologist or you got a thing for, living life on the dangerous and weird side, don't be walking up to murder hornet nests. They're on the ground. They look like termite nests. I guess they don't have to be on the ground, but the picture here, it looks like there's a murder hornet nest on the ground.
Yeah. Our only ally against the murder hornet is a parasite that prevents them from being able to reproduce. So we got that going for us.
Well, knowing the way nature tends to run its course, I imagine that the wasp will at some point learn how to evolve something to be all of a sudden asexual and reproduce on its own and not
There
have
you
to
go.
be part of a hive. And then we'll have equally as many murder hornets running around, but they won't require the use of a queen.
Keep hope alive, Nick.
Yeah.
Keep
They'll
hope alive.
they'll have like their own brain and they'll be able to run around and kill people without needing to check back in with mom.
Yeah.
There's this other thing that I wanted to point out too. Man, this is really cool. Of course, right now in 2021 society, we love bees. Everybody's a huge bee fan.
Yeah.
I saw this meme. My wife and I were laughing about where, it was like when I was a kid, when I was like in middle school, everyone was like, "Oh, gross, a bee, kill it," and then now it's like, "Hey, bee, are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I get you some water?" Everyone's into bees right now, right? And for good reason. They do a lot of good stuff. They also can kill murder hornets.
Yeah.
There's a video here that they literally cook the wasp. It's really cool. They envelop them with bees.
Yep.
So that the hornet comes into the nest, and then the bees immediately surround them completely. They mob it, and then every single one of the honeybees vibrates its wings so fast that the warming effect can raise the temperature in the cluster in the center where the hornet is to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. I guess that's a very specific number. They must have tested it, which of course kills it. And there's carbon dioxide levels that increase. I mean, this is an amazing and terrifying. I mean, honestly, I kind of feel for the hornet in this one. What a horrible way to go, to just be slowly cooked by buzzing, by buzzing bees around you. But you know what? Hey, screw you, hornet, for trying to kill bees, because we're into bees right now.
Yeah,
bees are a good thing.
But isn't that amazing though? That's pretty cool.
It is really cool that they kind
yeah.
of evolved the way to, let's figure this out. How do we protect ourselves from the hornet?
Yeah. Which is also interesting that because it's North American bees that can do that. Well, I guess Japanese bees do that as well, but North American bees already know. This is what's interesting to me. The North American bees already have this behavior, and maybe it's just a trigger based on wasps in general.
Right, maybe.
But the fact that it's already there from bees that have been separated from Japanese bees, there's no contact between them. So how is that instinct passed on?
At least that we don't know. I mean, maybe there's a whole like bee net or something that
there could be
secret internet or something.
I've been rereading
like this.
I've been rereading the Ender Quartet, Orson Scott Card's books, and the formics or buggers as they were originally called, but the formics have that. Generally, we think that insects communicate through scent and also through vibration. I know that wasps, red wasps in particular, nasty little fuckers, by the way, will, if they're pissed off, they call more wasps to their location by planting themselves and vibrating their wings rapidly.
That's how I communicate most of the time as well, too.
I'm talking to Kara right now.
I just sit here and vibrate until somebody comes and asks me if I'm okay. It's worked every time so far.
So there is a theory in the Ender books. They communicate through what they call the phallotic network. But there is a theory that there's something similar for insects of a kind on Earth right now. Like bees in particular, might be able to communicate with each other. Hives can communicate with hives and that sort of thing through means we haven't yet discovered. So pretty interesting stuff, actually.
Yeah,
could go off on a whole tangent on that.
One of these, I mean, the whole idea of a hive mind, it's definitely been in the realm of sci-fi so far, but it exists in the real world as well. And so I'm fascinated by the whole concept of using pheromones and vibrations and all kinds of stuff like that to communicate.
Yeah.
And not just to communicate like, hey, this person over here is vibrating, let's go check out what our friend's doing, but like actually communicating a specific thing. Like all these bees know what task they're supposed to accomplish that day.
Yeah.
Sure, that's built into their genetic wiring and all that, but there's more to it than that. And that's what I think is fascinating about the idea of a hive mind. And one of these days I'll tackle it in fiction, but I haven't done enough research into it.
Read a book called The Intention Experiment, which is a really interesting science-based look at phenomenon like psychic activity and precognition and remote healing and stuff like that. It actually cites quite a few actual scientific studies performed over the past couple hundred years, really. So but there is an idea in there about basically radiation as a transmission tool for certain psychic phenomenon.
Oh, nice.
Right, or electromagnetic frequency and things like that.
I'll link to that. No, that's good stuff. Yeah, so I've got the links here in the show notes ready to go. So everyone who wants to dive into the terrifying world of the Murder Hornets and the Demon Core can do so with one simple click of fate. And then come back. Don't tell us we didn't warn you.
We should just combine those two ideas and have the Demon Hornet, which is
Demon Hornet,
a radioactive hornet the size of a human fist,
or the Hornet Core.
Instead of venom, he attacks you with a neutron blast.
The blue light.
The Hornet Core.
The Hornet Core.
Murder Core.
Well, there you go. Well, that's the episode title this week is the Hornet Core. So definitely check in for that. And hey, if you're listening to this and you've got an idea for something you want us to cover or talk about or be terrified of or be fascinated by, we want to know about it. While we have researched just about everything this world has ever known, kidding. There's probably something we're missing. So you can reach out to us. Go to stuffthat'sreal.com. You can drop a line there, and of course subscribe and share all these, and just generally be our favorite, bestest fans. We will be back at you next week with some more cool stuff that's real, stuff that's cool, stuff that's real, but also is cool. I don't even know anymore. I just don't care. It's
stuff
cool.
That's real that you didn't know was real, but also is cool.
Thank you. I was thinking. I keep forgetting the parenthetical amendment in there.
That's because you named this thing, and like all Nick Thacker projects, it has to start ridiculous and then get whittled down.
The ridiculous. That's a marketing. The ridiculousness is wow. These guys are ridiculous. I'm going to listen to what they have to say, and then they come out going, I feel enlightened and greatly knowledgeably enhanced.
I know twice as much about murder hornets as I did when I came here.
0 times 0. 0 times 2 is still 0. So anyway, we'll be with you again next week. Check in on Fridays, and we will have more stuff that's real. And until then, we are your loving and gracious hosts. Take care, everyone.
Stuff that's real.